Good evening, everyone. And while we are surviving the first day of the second week of COP30, we are moving forward to the incredibly interesting and important topic that we will be discussing today. And welcome, everyone. And it's incredibly that we were not washed away by the rain. You can't even imagine how intense it was. And we literally now felt it firsthand. And the panel discussion that we are starting now has the crucial topic, as I have highlighted, on halting Russia's strategic projects in the Arctic, sanctions to protect the climate. And just to introduce you into the topic and how currently this state of affairs is, for the past decade, Russia's Arctic strategy has transformed from a regional development initiative to a global dual threat, financing aggression against Ukraine while accelerated climate breakdown in Earth's most vulnerable region. Today, we examine why stopping Russian energy exports via the Northern Sea route is essential for both international security and climate protection. Currently, Russia is pushing to triple LNG exports by 2035 and expand shipping through the North Sea route has deep geopolitical and environmental implications. We will begin our discussion by exploring how expansion connects to the global climate and security threat. And today we have the incredible privilege to be joined by outstanding experts, both online and here in Belém. And Nezir Sinaní, Executive Director, Be4 Ukraine Coalition, is joining us online. Swіtlana Романко, Founder and Executive Director of Razom We Stand, joining online with us. We can see you already on the screen, and welcome. Thomas Gillin, EU Political Campaigner, Greenpeace European Unit. Alice Ross, Computer of Unearthed online as well. We can see you. And Svetlana Krakowska, Senior Scientist in the National Arctic Scientific Center, and Marina Cymbaluk, Climate Policy Expert at the Center of Environmental Initiatives, Eco-Action. This is an outstanding panel, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing your reflections on this crucial topic. And I would like to understand it is, and it is possible to counterfact this threat. And I would like to bring into the conversation Nezir Sinaní. And the question would be framed with you around the following: that campaigns and advocacy efforts that you have been leading at the part of the Be4 Ukraine coalition, they have been truly instrumental in promoting sanctions and trade policies aimed at reducing Russian fossil fuel revenues. So the question is, how do sanctions on Arctic fossil fuel projects, especially LNG projects, fit into the broader strategy to cut off financing for the Russian aggression? And what are the key gaps in current international measures that need urgent attention? We can see you.
I hope you can hear me as well. Hi, everyone.
Yes, now we can hear as well.
Well, lovely to join you. Thank you so much for having me as well. And as I speak, if I cut off or you can't hear me well, please feel free to step in and stop me as I talk, because I'll try and be as brief as I can as well. Be4 Ukraine is a coalition of civil society organizations. It's around 100 of us that have been working over the past almost 4 years now since the full-scale invasion of Russia in Ukraine, to defund and disarm Russia's war in Ukraine. And it's not going to come as a surprise that a lot of the work that we do, it's actually all relates to the oil and gas, because that is the single largest source of income for the Russian government that's being used to fuel the war of aggression in Ukraine. I'll start flagging 3 key issues that we've been focusing recently, because as you said, there's been a lot of progress with a number of different packages of sanctions to target the Russian oil and gas stream as a way of ending the war in Ukraine, but not enough has been done. And that's going to lead me to the Arctic LNG discussion and what needs to be done there. But currently, our main priorities are 3 with regard to this line of work. The first one is to influence the REPowerEU legislation, which has come as a useful political and policy tool for us to continue pushing for a full ban on oil and gas. We do work on closing the refining loophole in sanctions. You know, this is the route that allows the Russian oil to enter Western markets continuously after being refined in third countries. And then the third sort of like area of work that we've been focusing has been on targeting the shadow fleet as well. Something you probably have heard a lot in the news as well in terms of like sanctions being imposed to cover them, but still there's hundreds of them that keep floating in the seas and enabling, you know, this business for Russia. Sanctions on Arctic LNG are now the central missing pillar of the global efforts to cut off Russia's war financing. Despite extensive sanctions, as I said, Russian fossil fuel remains still the single largest revenue stream feeding the Kremlin war economy. The EU alone has spent over 215 billion euros on Russian fossil fuel since the full-scale invasion began, and has helped generate nearly 1 trillion euros, if not more already, in export revenues for Moscow in this business. Now, with the Nord Stream destroyed and Ukrainian transit halted, the Arctic LNG has become one of Putin's most profitable and strategically protected assets. Yamal LNG, which is 20% owned by Total Energies, remains unsanctioned today. And the EU is still the largest customer, purchasing over 2/3 of its cargoes and delivering tens of millions in tax revenue directly to Moscow. Arctic LNG sanctions are essential not only for security, but beyond this, they're also important and critical for the climate protection as well, given we're at COP and covering the climate topic. So the Arctic fossil fuel expansion drives the dual climate security threat, in my opinion. So it continues financing, as I said, the Russia's aggression against Ukraine, but it also accelerates warming in the region that acts as the Earth's climate regulator. So any serious energy and climate strategy must recognize the Arctic LNG as a carbon bomb, but also as a war funding mechanism that's currently being used. So key gaps in the current sanctions architecture that required urgent attention, to my opinion, I would flag 4 very briefly. So Yamal LNG, as I said, remains fully unsanctioned. And this is the most glaring omission today in the sanctions packages that has been enacted by different governments. Western companies continue to lift, transport, insure, and profit from Yamal cargoes. European companies still provide the logistics backbone as well as the second issue that I would like to flag. So CPeak, Dynagas, Mitsui operate the specialized ice-class tankers that keep Yamal exports flowing today. Whereas European ports, especially those in France, Belgium, and Spain, remain the major getaways for Yamal shipments. The third thing I'd like to flag is the long-term contracts that lock in dependency until 2030 and beyond. So CEFE in Germany and Total Energies France, they continue to honor long-term purchase contracts despite the war. They also undermine the European sanctions credibility and climate leadership in this way as well. And then the fourth thing I would like to flag as a gap is the Asia reroute and the maritime loophole that remain wide open and that are being used basically to label, reroute, and reinsure with ease the Russian LNG. What is needed, very briefly, in terms of the priority measures, is, and it's something that B4Ukraine and its members keep advocating, is a dual-track approach that aligns climate and security objectives. What we want is a ban for all the imports of the Russian LNG and to accelerate the REPowerEU phase out to 2027, as I said. Even sooner would be more ideal and potentially doable as well. Dismantling the European service base, which include logistics, insurance, shipping, shipyard maintenance, that keeps enabling the Russian global LNG export is the second. Sanctioning directly Yamal LNG Novatek and its subsidiaries, as the financial heart of Russia's Arctic expansion is the third. And then a coordinated G7 secondary sanctions to close the rerouting loopholes that I talked a little bit before is the fourth in terms of the priority measures that I would like to flag for now. These would all be steps critical for both the Ukrainian security and global climate protection. And I'm sure there's more to it as well, but I'll stop here and leave it to my fellow speakers to add more to this at this point.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being with us and sharing those areas where you have been working hard to advance, like the understanding how important it is to cut off like Russia's war machine that is being fueled by the fossil fuels, and at good for like Світлана Романко, who would be saying war and what are the overlapping things about like fossil fuels dominating in whatever talks we're having. Even at COPs, we still have the great representation of the fossil fuel lobbyism here. When we are talking how to save the planet, but we would proceed with it a little bit further on, and I would like to loop in another Svetlana Romanko, who is joining us directly as a voice from the ground, but as well representing the outstanding organization Razom We Stand that has long advocated for a total phase out of the Russian fossil fuels in Europe. And following the work Razom fascinated, the research is being quoted and is spread among those people who even didn't have any clue what the impact of the dependency on. So for you is, from your perspective, taking into consideration your work that you had been doing with overall advocating for the total result of the funds, what kind of sanctions and what particular sanctions should be taken to tackle the exports of Russian fossil fuels from the Arctic import, and in what aspects? What can these sanctions be?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. And I don't know if you can hear me or see me. So it's such a pleasure to see you all. And thanks so much, Євгенія and everyone, for being so helpful in holding this event, being very far away, because tomorrow we will meet, tomorrow and day after tomorrow, we are meeting in Kyiv and with our team, just to strategize on how to sanction Yamal LNG, which is huge and which still not yet been sanctioned. And such a massive gratitude goes to our brave team, especially who is on behind the screens, Oleg, Olga, and many more people, Ira and others who've been tirelessly fighting the Russian fossil fuels since the very beginning with the hundreds of our other organizations from 60 countries. And this question you ask, Євгенія, is really pending. It's emerging to ask, and especially during the fourth year of the full-scale invasion, and Ukraine still being withstanding so hard and so effortlessly, like really trying to destroy Russia's war machine, and I believe we will get there. So this question goes deeply to the roots of why Razom We Stand exists, actually, because we've been established to end global fossil fuel addictions that fits Putin's war machine and Russia's war machine. As we can see, exports of Russian fossil fuels are not just about international trade or global commodities, which are not equivalent to the global good, because they are fossil fuels, they bring destruction, they bring a lot of deaths, corrupted authoritarian dictatorships and regimes, because they are in fact a geopolitical weapons system, which we helped build, the humanity helped build since the third industrial revolution. And now we found ourselves in the midst of immense disaster, but nowhere is this clear than in the Arctic, where Russia's LNG expansion serves three strategic purposes. First is financing the war. Second is circumventing sanctions and locking the world into decades-long dependency on Russia's fossil fuel and bloody energy. So this definitely says it's clear to everyone that exports of LNG from the Arctic, especially from Yamal, are funding Putin's war chest. And the direct financial link between exports of LNG from the Arctic and Russia's military campaign has been largely proven, especially by Greenpeace, whom we are so grateful that they produce their research findings, sending us to the strong data that between 2022 and 2024, Yamal LNG, Russia's largest, as Nezir said, of course, that's true, Arctic project, paid an estimated 9.5 billion in profit taxes to the Russian federal budget. And to put this in perspective, this is enough to buy 9.5 million artillery shells, or 271,000 Shahed drones, or 2,686 modern battle tanks. And we know that Kyiv was immensely under attacks in the quantities from 400 of drones up to the utmost for 700. And it already has been hugely destructive and so severe. And can you imagine this amount of weapons being bought for these Russian fossil fuel taxes paid by different companies using the possibilities of Yamal? And our own analysis done by brilliant Olga Kondratyuk and Oleg Savitsky showed that just 6 months of tax revenues from Yamal LNG exports to Europe from April to September 2025 could fund the missiles and drones Russia launched in October 10th in one of the worst attacks that disrupted power and water supply in Kyiv. So this is not theoretical. This is a blood money, and every LNG tanker leaving the Arctic carries the price of Ukrainian lives. Well, the next, I'll try to be clear, making a few more points, because that's so essential that everyone is able to hear and understand those data, because normally people don't look into this data deeply. For example, in the UK, while speaking to Sky News, the journalists asked me, okay, but we've sanctioned Russian LNG. We did it. We did all possible. No, you didn't, because your insurance companies are insuring 74% of all LNG and oil shipments so far being carried by Russia's oil and gas fleet. So you still have a way to go. And the most common perception is that everything's been sanctioned. Sanctions are not effective, and we have nothing to do against Russia because we sanctioned all what was ever possible. This is not true, because the Arctic shipping is becoming Russia's sanction evasion route. And after Europe cut Russia pipeline gas and sanctioned Arctic LNG too, you might think that, yeah, the strategy is failing, as I just said. But what is actually happening? Yamal LNG operates at full capacity with zero sanctions, exporting over 17 million tons of gas annually. And don't think that governments can see that or can calculate, because we've been witnessing U.S. government imposing strict sanctions on Arctic LNG that immediately ended all carriages and all production at Arctic LNG 2 when they wanted so. They have all data, they have tools available, they can do it easily, but they just need to want it. So Yamal LNG still operates in a full capacity, as we've seen, and it allows Russia to bypass traditional choke points and reach both European and Asian markets. And Western shipping companies like CPEC from the UK, Dynagas from Greece, and Mitsui lines from Japan operate the specialized ice-breaking fleet that makes this possible. And actually, I will speak in a minute a bit more about the contracts, which has been a cornerstone, a root cause of overall problem, because Repower EU now provides enough timeline for ending the long-term contracts, which won't help to save Ukraine and help us in practice to cut Russia's gas supply. So Total Energies has contracts with Yamal until 2041. Cefa is German state-owned company, former Gazprom Germany, until 2038, and Shell until 2041. These aren't just business deals, they were intended as long-term strategic relationships. And Russia is doubling down, so we can see plans to triple LNG exports by 2035, with Arctic LNG to eventually coming online alongside Yamal LNG 2. And every year we delay sanctions. In another year, these projects entrench themselves. Another year of infrastructure investments, another year of contract extensions, and the window to stop this deadly expansion is closing. So just to bring a bit more on the climate dimension, I won't stop here because we have brilliant Swietlana Krakowska who can speak hours, and she did so. She spoke to endless number of outlets, of media and governments, and they hear sometimes. So it's now time to speak against Yamal and Arctic so strongly. So the Arctic is warming because of those activities on gas extraction, on oil extraction, 4 times faster than the global average. And new fossil fuel infrastructure accelerates the feedback loops, and melting permafrost releases methane. Less ice means less reflection of solar radiation, and Russia is essentially weaponizing the Arctic twice, once to fund the war and once to destabilize the global climate. So sanctions against Arctic fossil fuels serve both security and climate imperatives simultaneously. And even if we can see that climate topic is not that popular among governments, they will be there soon, because the destruction and catastrophe the climate change brings to the communities, to the population, is unthinkable, and the governments will have to deal with the consequences, and this time has already come. So they won't be denying the climate change and climate problem forever, because otherwise they will have to pay enormous money. So we have some hope. And there is a crucial point here I wanted to emphasize on about Russian Arctic LNG that can't operate without Western support, because 14 or 15 specialized ice-breaking tankers. There are only 15 of them, and the others Russia can't build in South Korea because they lack of opportunity. They are under sanctions and they can't get access to infrastructure and to any support. So Western insurers, classification societies, and shipyards provide essential services, and European ports like Zeebrugge in Belgium and Dunkirk in France provide the market access. So that gives us enormous leverage, and sanctions work when they target the critical dependencies. And this is where sanctions can bite hardest and fastest. So if the political will exists to support Ukraine overall and save Europe in general, because all Europe is under threat, and even more beyond European borders, more countries are, even though they didn't realize it or don't realize it in full, they will also understand it while seeing how Russia turns to attacking the other countries that became available or weaker, or any other opportunity. So it must materialize in comprehensive sanctions against exports of Russian fossil fuels from the Arctic. So the sanctions cut war funding, close sanction loopholes, and prevent long-term fossil fuel dependency. That's why we truly stand with Ukraine, which we very much ask you, call on you to do, we must be willing to stop funding the war against the country. This means sanctioning Yamal LNG, prohibiting Western companies from servicing Russian Arctic operations, and ending long-term contracts now, not in 2041. And we will be fighting for that as we've did, and I believe we will be there. And we call on you to be on our side and help us as much as you can, because that's not just our fight or Razom fight or a coalition fight or anything like that. That's a critical fight for the perspective of energy freedom and life without fossil fuels.
Thank you so much. And thank you for, despite there was a slight chance for you to break out, but the work that you have been doing and the way how you're speaking about that and framing sanctions, it's really felt that you are devoting lots of time of your organization, but as well like partnering with organizations like-minded people. And a couple of times you mentioned that countries don't have this privilege of delaying the climate action because sooner or later they would feel it firsthand. And it was a very interesting conversation just before the panel with Thomas, whom I would bring in now into the discussion, and Thomas Gellin, that is representing Greenpeace European Union. We had a quick chat saying that climate change is no longer like on the top of the agenda, but once you are reframing it as the energy security, or once you are reframing it as the way how it is existential for the countries alike, that's why working with sanctions and truly approaching the Russian actions not only as the ones that are against the sovereign and independent Ukraine, but that is undermining that the action that are undermining the global security is incredibly important. They are very much interesting aspects like from the legal standpoint, and definitely Svetlana, we would have like a fantastic conversations and like further and the work to be done from the legal side, like maybe doing some kind of suggestions on the international legal fora, how we can approach that, combined with the incredible efforts done by Leonard de Klerk, who is accounting the emissions from the and would have the official side event tomorrow, where like everyone is warmly welcomed and invited. So as I've already announced, Thomas, and thank you very much for being here and for all the fantastic and outstanding work that you have been doing. And as Greenpeace research reveals that European countries, including those total companies, those like Total Energy, Shell, Cefi, remain bound by long-term contracts with Yamal LNG, the one that Svetlana mentioned a couple of times. And these contracts, they extend up to 2041 as well, what Svetlana has eloquently highlighted. What is, from your perspective, how do these corporate commitments undermine the EU sanctions policy? Because as well, we chatted with you saying about the very quick response from the EU in the form of the EU Repower Plan, but at the same time, there is something missing. And maybe you can elaborate a little bit more what kind of mechanisms could break this dependency with still respecting the urgency of the actions to be done and staying in the legal domain, in the policy domain of the EU.
Hi, everyone. Maybe the first thing to say about these contracts, these commitments, they're legal. If they're here, if they're still here, if they've not been ended or covered by sanctions so far, it's because the EU, its member states don't want to do it, or at least a majority of them. On sanctions, you really need all member states to agree, so it's always a tricky process. And they're not only, it's even more than just being tied in contracts, because if you look at Total Energy, they actually have shares in Yamal LNG. They don't just buy the LNG from Yamal and sell it to Europe. They make money in a different way as well by having shares 20% shares in Yamal LNG and 20%, well, close to 20% in the parent company. So that's how tied they are. It goes beyond the simple purchase contract. And so you have the sanctions process, and there's been progress on this because the LNG was included in the EU sanctions last month. It's already effective, and for short-term contracts, they'll be covered by sanctions from April next year, and then the long-term contracts should be covered from 2027, I think, normally. And then in parallel to that, you have a legislative process to ban Russian gas. So that still needs to be finalized, but it should be at some point, the latest by the end of 2027, we'd have a ban on both short-term and long-term contracts. So eventually, these should have an impact on these companies' ability to continue doing business. Now the problem is, so we're quite supportive of that, but there's three problems with that. First one is it came way too late. This rush to diversify away from Russian energy. I'm not even saying it should have started in February 2022, but actually you already had a war of aggression in 2014. I think by then we should have realized already that being dependent on Russia for energy was a problem, and sending so much money to Russia. But instead, we went the other way. Just a year after that, the Paris Agreement was signed, so that was an extra incentive to move away from Russian fossil fuels to begin with, but then all fossil fuels in general. So it's coming too late. We know that. It's not coming fast enough. We do think there are still discussions as to the exact timing. of this ban on Russian gas, but we do think it could happen faster than what's on the table at the moment. And it's not, it doesn't cover everything it should cover. So it's covering gas, not just LNG, but pipeline gas as well. So that's significant. But it's not covering oil and it's not covering nuclear. Those European countries quite reliant on nuclear for energy generation are also reliant one way or the other to a different extent, but all of them at least partly reliant on Russia for energy, for nuclear energy, not just the fuel, but also the infrastructure, etc. So I'd say, yeah, that's some of the key problems. And yeah, I think we have in terms of timing, it could be that by the end of the year, we have a final decision on when all of these contracts will end. But then the devil's in the detail. You have lots of discussions, and there's always a potential for loopholes in sanctions and also in the legislative process. And as important as the sanctions are, sanctions can also be lifted fairly easily, fairly quickly. Whereas having it written into the law as it is currently being done is a bit more of a security that we don't go back to it. And then finally, the problem we have to sort of focus as well on the climate is these plans. They're focused. It's all in the title. They're focused on moving away from Russian gas, but they're not. We're not drawing the lessons from the mistake we made with Russia. And they're also focused on shifting to other providers for fossil fuels. And that's obviously a problem because I'm not going to put Trump in the US on the same level as Putin in Russia. But there is obviously, I think we can see there's a problem. We know the US has pressured the EU on to go back to renege on some of the climate green legislation. And even with less problematic partners, say like Norway, the idea is we should use the momentum. We're in the right direction with Russian energy, not fast enough, but in the right direction, and we should use that to move away from fossil fuels altogether. If we manage it, when you think that 45% of Europe's gas came from Russia in 2022, we've gone down. Absolutely not enough and not fast enough. And actually, we've shifted from pipeline gas to LNG gas. So I'm not being too celebratory here. But if we manage to do that, we should really use this momentum to move away from fossil fuel altogether.
That is a fascinating reflection and walking us through all of the so much expected introduction of sanctions. And thank you very much for showing us both the timeline and the legality and the legal nature. And of course, when we are aiming to reach the consensus within such a union like European Union, it's always quite of the challenge when we have certain countries on board there that can always stand against this. But hopefully this fantastic work that you all have been doing, like with Greenpeace as well, and informing and counterfacting Russian misinformation, disinformation, I'm sure that this is also the big part of something that is being done by you. And thank you very much. It's very much interesting as well that you framed like the climate policies and the way that made me think that it's all about energy security again, right? So why don't the country and maybe the worldwide consensus ideally, it's not just shifting away from the one type of the fossil fuels, avoiding these lock-in effects, but just having some kind of elaborated energy security Marshall Plan, for the whole world, having Ukraine and literally using the momentum of Ukraine triggering this eventual response. Because as you highlighted, war started in Ukraine in 2013, not 2022. And this is important to keep in mind for how long Europe was delaying the acceptance of the fact that continual reliance on Russian fossil fuels is the reason why the whole region can be insecure short-term and long-term. So thank you very much. And we definitely would come back to all of the other speakers and to you as well in the next round of the questions. But this is again fossil fuel war, and I wanted to make a joke that we should have counted how many times Svetlana Krakowska have already been cited before coming up to your part. And Svetlana, thank you very much for being here with us and being the voice of national forums, and very much interesting because you're bringing the scientific expertise. And when you hear like that, this is the Russian fossil fuel war from a scientist who were there firsthand doing the experiments on the ground, and seeing and witnessing how the Arctic in ecosystems were changing like once you were there. And it's incredible like what kind of experience you had while being on the stations. And the question for you within our discussion is, from the perspective of the climate science, what are the consequences of intensified fossil fuel extraction and shipping in Arctic region for the global climate systems? So what were you witnessing already? What is expected to be happening? And so what kind of price we are going to pay for inaction in that region?
Now it's okay? Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Actually, I guess, I hope it will help. It will help for all of us to get rid of fossil fuel and to withstand in Ukraine this Russian aggression financed by this fossil fuels. Well, maybe yeah, I will answer this question as well, but I just want to reflect a bit on what I was listening to. And I remember how we were together with Svetlana in 2022 in Euro Parliament. At that time, it was clear that this dependency of Europe on fossil fuel and, you know, being in Ukraine when Russia just switched off gas for us in our New Year night, and we survived this. So maybe I was a bit naive, just to thinking that Europe will recognize the dependency. And I remember myself in this Euro Parliament, just coming from Kiev, which desperately was surviving this air raid attack. I was about to take every parliament member and just to say, look, go to Kiev and do this gathering in Kiev. Here, not in Strasbourg, you know. Yeah, of course, my thoughts were, I was not so impassioned, of course, and I knew that it will take time. Of course, well, anyway, I'm happy now that at least nobody argued with me about that it is fossil fuel war at the moment. Well, coming to climate science, and Arctic, which definitely one of two polar region, which is warming much faster. So it's indeed 4 to 6 times, in fact, faster than the global mean. In Arctic, it's one of the tipping point. So why this sea ice? Because it can trigger much more warming. So it's one of amplifying factor, in fact. So it's, again, it's physical law. If you will have less sea ice there, you will have more sun radiation absorbed by ocean. And again, warming more this Arctic Ocean and warming more atmosphere and less ice. So it's amplifying, self-amplifying actually process. It's one part of story, let's say. Another part of story is even more threatening, I would say, because it's about methane. It's about these methane bombs, so called, because they are underground. They are in this. I'm not sure about English terminology. This eternal freezing, yeah, but which is not actually now for. You know, it's melting and releasing methane, and we don't know how much. At the moment, well, we have satellites which can measure, but of course, all satellites should be verified with ground measurements, and Russia not interested in it. Actually, Russia was not interested in climate action at all because they considered climate change as positive factor for their country. Not all, of course, there, because I know real scientists from Russia who understood these long-term consequences, and they were in minority, but they understood all consequences, even for Russian Federation as well. Maybe other consequences I can say, which related to the war Russia started. They have much less capacity now to fight the wildfire in Siberia, which again add more emission to our, actually it's our common carbon budget as well. And we saw this from, again, satellite measurements, how much Siberia burned. Another point, of course, about Arctic. So they were waiting to have this North Sea way to use it. Of course, for them, it's much cheaper to have it than go all around other continent, let's say. And now they're happy to have it. And it creates political tensions because other countries actually want to use it as well, like China, which is in all Arctic coalition, all Arctic assembly tries to be part of. It's not only scientific, of course, so that's another way how they can build, big ties with Russia on this ground as well. So there are many aspects, and in scientific way, there were stopped international projects, and being Ukrainian scientists, I should say that it's good, because we don't want to support, terrorist state and legitimize this terror Russia to have Russian scientists in international bodies. But from other point of view, of course, we need data. From other point of view, we not believe those data which were provided before even, because again, I know those scientists, some of them were just silent, some of them were just used to build arguments against climate action, even on such negotiation like we are here. So can we believe Russian scientists? I should say no. At the moment, definitely. So, it's many layers and many levels thoughts on climate scientists, and again, this problem of fossil fuel, which is, on my opinion, should be stopped right now and even many years ago. But I understand that it's a real process which should be done, and I really hope that more people and more actually parliament members, not only in Europe but worldwide, will help us to stop our dependency and to make this green transformation, which is Ukraine leading now. And actually, it's pure economics as far. Yeah, so it's really people for other countries just to come to more efficient way to use money, because otherwise we go with this planet to hell. And yeah, definitely. And I just remind me answer of Michael Mann to Bill Gates that we cannot reboot this planet when we crashed it. So we all need to take care about our environment, and for us Ukrainians, we need to take care of our country and actually part of Europe again. So be together, it will actually help all of us.
Just applauses. Thank you so much. That's right. There is no life on that planet, right? And even though we can't eat money when we are running out of food, still we have to keep in mind that behind the green transition and behind transitioning away and shift and phasing out fossil fuels, there is always the economic benefits of that. And like have countries understand that first of all it's existential, like for the security reasons, but as well it is like great economic benefits and cutting the incredible Russian aggression that is happening in the 21st century. And while we speak, there is like the war happening and going on in Ukraine, and families are suffering, getting adjusted to the absolutely new reality, which no way should be happening in the 21st century, neither in Ukraine, anywhere else in the world. And thank you very much. You have highlighted and like made me think that this is the right time to ask Alice. Alice, we can see you. You are here there with us. And I was fascinated by the investigative journalism reporting that you have been carrying and leading. And what you have been doing has shed light on the connections between the network of the European shipping, insurance, and financial actors and key Russian companies that enable the exports of the fossil fuels from the Arctic. So the question for you, what's in the process of your investigation? What kind of loopholes you have found out, or corporate behaviors maybe, that are the most urgent, the most critical to tackle now, and whether we can use it, like whether like the existing sanctions are there already ready, and how we can adjust, knowing these loopholes for the behavioral patterns, how we can adjust effectiveness of the sanctions that we have been mentioning before. And thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to join such an interesting conversation. There are some interruptions for me when I'm listening. So if I get interrupted while I'm speaking, please just wave and I will pause. But thank you very much. So I work for Unearthed, which is a journalistic unit within Greenpeace UK. And I spent quite a lot of last winter in an investigation looking at what I consider to be a super interesting loophole in the exports of LNG to Europe from Yamal LNG. We've heard a lot about Yamal LNG this afternoon. What becomes apparent when you look at a map of Yamal is that it sits on a narrow inlet that leads out to the Northern Sea route. And what we found was that during the winter months, so between about December and May, when the sea ice is at its thickest, almost all of the shipments from Yamal LNG rely on the assistance of nuclear-powered icebreaker ships, which are owned by a sanctioned entity. They're operated by a company called Atomflot, which is a subsidiary of the Kremlin's nuclear agency, Rosatom. Atomflot has been under sanctions by the UK, by the EU, and by the US since at least February 2023, I believe. And there seems to be a real ambiguity around Atomflot and the sanctions on Atomflot. But what we found was that basically almost every single shipment coming to Europe during the height of the winter months directly followed an Atomflot icebreaker service as it went on its journey towards Europe. This means that effectively during the winter months, when the LNG is needed most in Europe, when the LNG is most in demand in Europe, it cannot leave the Arctic without the assistance of this sanctioned entity, Atomflot. This is a trade that appears to have earned millions of dollars for Atomflot. Again, an entity which is under sanctions because of the important role that it plays in helping the Kremlin to bankroll its actions in Ukraine. We found that European companies were buying these cargoes. We were able to identify a number of the companies very clearly, and in other cases, we were able to show that there was a strong likelihood that these cargoes had relied on the assistance of a sanctioned body when leaving the Arctic. Now, both the EU and the UK's sanctions regime prohibit any kind of financial relationship, whether direct or indirect, with a sanctioned entity. So this would appear to be, like, at the very least, a questionable practice. We found that Atomflot had earned millions of dollars from assisting these cargoes. But what we found was, when we published these findings, was a very interesting lack of curiosity, shall I say, towards the findings from the regulators and from the companies themselves. The European companies argued that they did not pay Atomflot themselves. They did not have any direct financial relationship with the company. But this completely ignores the fact that, they bought the cargoes that could not have reached them without the assistance of the sanctioned entity. We are told that the reasonable interpretation of the sanctions law is that it covers both direct and indirect financial relationships. We wrote to the UK's sanctions regulator about our findings and received no response whatsoever. So to us, we still have a lot of questions over what the role of these sanctions is in that case. And we think that actually the sanctions may have been intended to limit Arctic 2, Arctic LNG 2, but there appears to be a deliberate policy to turn a blind eye towards the role of the Atomflot vessels in helping LNG from Yamal reach the European markets. We think that this is a serious loophole in the sanctions packages, and it is very interesting to us, as I say, that the authorities appear keen to turn such a blind eye to it. It's not the only area where we've seen this sort of ambiguity play out. For example, I think other panelists have called attention to the fact that while the UK banned all imports of oil and of gas from Russia at the beginning of 2023, for the next 2.5 years, British companies played a really key role in the trade. So some research from Razom We Stand found that a UK ship owner transported 40% of all the shipments from Yamal LNG for the first half of 2025. And this sort of apparent grey area or sort of gap in the sanctions has persisted for a huge amount of time. So we wonder if there is something similar going on with Atomflot. But to us, the standout fact is that to date, there has been an interesting lack of curiosity.
Thank you very much. It's so drastic to hear. And I very much like the way how you eloquently called the ignorance, the lack of curiosity. Thank you very much for the incredible investigation that you're doing. And we really hope that it would not take more time for the European policymakers to acknowledge this fact and to bring this curiosity back, because it's like the fierce urgency of now to tackle that. And thank you very much. If you can stay with us for a while, we would really appreciate. I've collected one tricky question for all of the panelists once we finish hearing the incredible expertise and perspectives from all of the panelists. And now I would like to bring, because the cross-cutting issue that has raised up, that companies in the UK, what Alice mentioned, in the European Union, they have been trying to do business as usual. And the question actually arises once there is a chance, there is a possibility for the international community to bring this curiosity back and to understand what should be the proper responses. And for this, I would like to bring in Marina Cymbaluk, who is representing the Eco Action. And thank you very much for being here with us. I know how busy you have been speaking around different panels and sharing your the great the great research and advocacy that EcoAction has been doing on this front as well. So the question, like with regards to the international community again, and Ukraine, as we have been mentioned this so many times across all of these days in Ukraine's panel, that this is the case study, and like the trigger, and thank you very much, Tom, you also mentioned it, that Ukraine triggered long-awaited response from the European Union to acknowledging the dependency on the Russian fossil fuels. So how countries and how the international communities and how countries like Ukraine, that's already on the front lines of both the war and the impacts of the climate crisis, how they are shifting the global narrative around the competition for the Arctic resources. And is it this shift is something that can help us to cooperate more on the protection of the Arctic, what Svetlana mentioned, the way how it is changing and becoming the methane bomb? And what role could targeted sanctions, the one that we discussed today on the fossil fuel projects, play in preventing this unfortunate but existing race for the melting Arctic?
Thank you once again for inviting us all to talk about this hugely important topic. I think my speech will be a bit of an overview of what has been said, because a lot has been said already, but I'd also like to take a little bit step back and to talk about this whole overview of what is actually going on, what has been going on for the last decade, and what do we mean by this competition and cooperation. So we all know that the Arctic has been of an interest for centuries, but on the other hand, the Arctic coast seemed clearly divided between states, bordering states, through the 200 nautical miles exclusive economic zones. So, and now we see that today the region is once again turning into this major hotspot topic. So why it's happening? Because states don't want to have only these 200 nautical miles exclusive economic zones. They want more, and they file in these requests, and they are trying to find some excuses to get access to more land. And there is one really big reason for that. It's climate change. So among the main players competing for influence in the Arctic is the US, of course, and Canada, and Denmark, Norway, and China, which is beyond those Arctic states, but still it really eagerly wants to be involved, and very actively Russia. I'd really like to dedicate this speech not like to Russia, but also to what's going on in the Arctic generally. So like I mentioned, the trigger for making the Arctic the center of our attention right now is climate change, because Arctic ice is disappearing, and this is a perfect opportunity for the countries to utilize those routes in the Arctic, key routes. These are particularly the Northern Sea Route, along Russia's coast, and the Northwest Passage through Canada. But why are we talking about Russia? Because Russia, among all these states who are fighting to have this little bit more space in the Arctic, Russia especially is the most militarized and resource-dependent state in the Arctic, which makes it pretty logical to start this discussion about the region. And a large share of Russia's export resources, including oil and gas, are also located in the Arctic. So that's the reiteration of how Russia is not in any way interested in tackling climate change, because it's really positive for them. The warmer the Arctic is, the more possibilities Russia has to make these extractions in a faster, cheaper way, and transporting those fossil fuels then. And since the mid-2010s, what is really interesting, Russia has been actively restoring and expanding Soviet-era military infrastructure and regularly holding military exercises in the region. And because of sanctions and international isolation that it got since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Russia is also actively cooperating with China to develop Arctic shipping routes and extract hydrocarbons. That we also should keep that in mind, what sanctions do and what we can do also to prevent this kind of cooperation. The Arctic, 22% of world's undiscovered oil and gas reserves, along with huge amounts of those sources that are known to humanity. And it's also not only oil and gas, and we should be aware of this fact, but it's about rare critical minerals, it's about iron ore, coal, phosphates, precious metals, gemstones, and diamonds. So when we are talking about energy security and also the topic of renewables, we also need to keep in mind the fight for these critical minerals in the future. Just some notes I'm making along the way. So these shorter shipping routes are another major reasons, not only resources, but these shipping routes, the second reason why global powers are paying close attention to the Arctic. Again, less ice, like one of the key messages, less ice means less fuel, less time, and less transportation costs. And why do we need this shift from competition to cooperation? One of the reasons Dr. Krakowska has perfectly explained, these are the environmental consequences and the catastrophic climate impact if we do nothing and continue with this business as usual and expect extractivism. But another factor that triggers, that is linked to this fossil fuels is war. And we've talked about that a lot during this panel. I'd like once again to reiterate, since Russia's full-scale invasion, Russia has earned almost 1 trillion euros from fossil fuel exports. And again, let me stress once again, most of Russia's fossil fuels lie in the Arctic. So these are these key messages that we should keep in mind when talking about the Arctic and the dangerous consequences we may have if we let Russia do what it is doing right now and what it's planning to do in the future. And now I'd like to talk not only about sanctions, but like what are other international mechanisms. And one of the promising tools we already have is the High Seas Treaty. It creates great mechanisms actually to establish protected areas in the Arctic and to have this mandatory environmental impact assessments on the projects the Arctic countries are working on in the region. And this should be in areas beyond national jurisdiction, in international waters, including the 2.8 kilometers square of the Arctic Ocean that lie in the high seas. What is really important, 75 countries have already signed and ratified it, meaning it's 60 plus, so it will come into force starting in 2026. And Ukraine has also signed it. We haven't ratified it yet, but we need to do it. It's a huge step forward, especially given the fact that Russia is really against this treaty. It hasn't signed it, it hasn't ratified it. So yeah, so that's in our national interests. And talking about these Arctic states that I mentioned before, Russia is the only one that refuses to cooperate, because Denmark and Norway have already signed and ratified. The US, China, and Canada have signed at least, but Russia has done nothing and isn't going to do that. So we need to do, what we need to do now is think about this accountability. Yes, we have these high seas treaties. Russia isn't going to sign it. Russia isn't going to ratify it. So what if Russia behaves irresponsibly in the Arctic? Like, what real consequences it will face? And we surely need stronger cooperation on that. And now I think accountability issue is what comes up almost during all different topics. Climate justice and reparations, like everywhere, accountability is what we're talking about, because this remains a huge issue, and international law is still really like ineffective. And the Antarctica, with its environmental protocol to the Antarctic Treaty, is often mentioned as a possible example. But it's much stricter. It was adopted in 1959 when all countries were much eager to cooperate with each other. So if Russia now refuses to support the High Seas Treaty, how realistic is to expect it to sign or to support a stricter mechanism for Arctic? And that is why we are talking about sanctions. because even considering all possible measures that can be taken right now, sanctions against Russia and coordinated international pressure remain one of the few effective ways that we have to actually address Russia's plans to exploit the region. And the faster we act, the better for us. And yeah, we cannot delay that, because right now, right this second, Russia is planning yet another attack on civilians in Ukraine. And I'm not even talking about only Ukraine. Russia was able, thanks to its fossil fuel experts, to finance the wars against Georgia 2 times, against Ukraine, against Moldova, so many countries. It's not only about Ukraine. And if we don't stop it, they will go further. So what is 100% clear is that allowing this business as usual in the Arctic would set a really dangerous precedent. And if we do allow this precedent to happen, risk weakening everything, this future diplomacy and future treaties and future efforts to protect fragile environments. So my final message is that we simply cannot afford to fail the Arctic, because if we fail the Arctic, we'll fail both the climate and the fragile peace that depends on it. Thank you.
Wow, thanks a lot for such a comprehensive overview. And as we are running closer to the day 1, week 2 of COP, I think this is the first time since, this is the first actually topic like that raised up at this International Climate Conference. And I wish it was more discussed with such broad perspectives and activities that you all have been doing to tackle the problem and the continual dependency on the Russian fossil fuels that is causing the incredible destruction of one of the most vulnerable regions, creating like all of the grounds for the ongoing competition for the resources. And it feels like once there is a consensus on urgency of actions from the global community, still we have this topic very much missing from the global conversations. I would welcome the questions from the audience if they're the one, because I have a number of the tricky one. Oh, yeah.
Ted Kronmiller from Capturiant. It's been a great honor to be in your country. I've been in Ukraine since February. Slava Ukraini. Yes, very, very pertinent issues. I think the EU has spent more money on Russian gas than they have on supporting Ukraine. So I think Ukraine is doing a tremendous amount to create other forms of energy, and I think you're addressing big areas in terms of the risk with methane and climate. So what do you think are some additional legal mechanisms that that we could use to protect the Arctic and in terms of international treaties or in terms of other legal mechanisms?
Is anybody from online happy to take this question?
Yeah, I can take this one. So we'll be leaving for a train soon, but I'm happy to take this one. All keys the US currently hold in President Trump's hands. And what we've seen just now, just recently, the second sanction package was approved as Senator Lindsey Graham just announced. And this is mostly about the secondary sanctions, but until we will have Yamal LNG field sanctioned as such, like everything, all financial transactions, as it has been done just for other purchases, for Nord Stream 2, like no financial, where the countries don't have jurisdiction or sovereignty over Arctic, which is complicated. As we know, there are different countries competing and extending their sovereign rights on exploring Arctic reserves, which to me as an environmentalist is not fair at all, because Arctic don't belong or Greenland or the US or Russia. It belongs to overall population and humanity and all the nations. But the current legal regime is not the most favorable, as we can say diplomatically, but saying more radically, it would mean that sanctioning everything related to Yamal LNG would bring us to the point where the jurisdictions of the countries will have to comply with those sanctions imposed. So this is mainly about that. But also there is the other side, which we'll try to utilize across the European Union, especially with Oleg helps, is this is a proper regulation to cut methane emissions, because the current geopolitics is tough, while US wants everyone, especially Europe, explicitly extend on buying their gas, but not Russian gas. Diversification is currently difficult because all gas comes from Qatar and Saudi, and Qatar and Saudi don't like European Green Deal, they don't like methane directive, and they don't want to supply this gas to the countries where the methane emissions are being so solidly tracked as it's being planned. So this is one of the indirect, implicit way to cut Russian financial flows. And like ending to reply to that, I would say this just announced sanction package adopted by the US will provide more handy opportunities for President Trump to sanction, to close the loopholes. We don't know if he would be willing to do this, but hopefully yes. And this is our task, to communicate this to the most powerful US regime, as we've seen, because Gunvor wanted to buy Russian Lukoil assets, but US government said no way. And yes, they said, okay, we will comply because you are the most impactful financial regulator. If you don't license the purchase, we won't purchase. So this has to be extended on all purchases currently made from Russian Yamal LNG field. And the shareholders, even they are native Russian shareholders, they will pull out of that endeavor for sure.
Thanks. Any other questions?
Hi, so I'm Canadian, and I'm just curious as to, given our geographic position and our position, Canada is really involved in gas and soon LNG. What could a country like Canada do to help in this situation?
Hi. Thank you for coming. It's really great to have people also from bordering Arctic countries to discuss this together with you. I mentioned High Seas Treaty, so I think the first step is to ratify it. Yes, and hopefully you're working on that already, but showing the need to, the desire and the need to work on that and to cooperate with the international community and have also this put this additional pressure on other Arctic states in the US. I'm not sure if they are going, given the circumstances, to do this active climate work, but who knows? And together put this additional pressure on Russia. Maybe it can also give some surplus in considering the circumstances. But also when it comes to sanctioning Russia's fossil fuels and activities in general, it would be also really beneficial to have Canada on board, and your huge support will mean a lot. Thank you.
Maybe I could add a couple of others as well, if you allow me, Eugenia. But in terms of Canada, like, they could join the UK and US in sanctioning the Arctic LNG logistics chain, because Canada is one of the countries that hasn't yet targeted the vessels and shipping companies or the service networks that enable Yamal LNG and the others, as sort of like a no-brainer to start with. But they could also play a critical role as part of the G7 nations in terms of like pushing for the secondary sanctions that we brought up during our discussion as well, that target the Russian LNG. So the biggest remaining loophole, as we said, is the Russia reroute, the Asia reroute, where the Russian LNG continues being relabeled and blended in third countries and then re-exported globally, for example, as well. And what we've been asking the EU, I think the same ask also applies for Canada, just imposing a full ban on Russian LNG and to close the transshipment loopholes for North America. Just some, to name a few. There's more, certainly, and we're happy to work with all our Canadian civil society partners to work together to work with the Canadian government as well to help in this regard.
Yeah, just add in my 5
Thank you very much.
Yeah, 5 kopyka, adding Ukrainian small money to that. Just you know, I am expressing a huge gratitude to Canadian civil society who stood up for Ukrainians so strongly, and they did like really incredible, fantastic actions. And this proves us that even Canada, a petrostate, one of the largest, who trades oil largely on the world market, they will have to change under the pressure of such an incredible civil society. So what would help if the oil price cap would be significantly lowered, but this won't happen this won't happen if the J7 countries, as Nezir said. I just wanted to a bit emphasize on that important point. If the J7 countries won't support, and Canada plays a major role in J7, so we would kindly ask if it is possible to lower the oil price cap until $25, which is basically the cost of extraction of oil, and Russia will collapse then. Just imagine Russia being Rosneft sanctioned, Lukoil sanctioned, everything sanctioned, and Yamal, we hopefully will get sanctioned altogether because that's like only a way forward, no way backwards. So, and imagine when the oil price cap gets to the very down of the price, and what will Russia do then? Yeah, they will have to announce some good news for Ukraine, hopefully. So please do help with that. And if you have governmental contacts, someone who you can advocate or organize people to come and advocate for that matter, we would be incredibly grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I'm going to be a little cheeky and just to like bring the bigger picture. If Canada could stop selling us it's fossil fuels, stop us from burning it. They're a big exporter, big producer of fossil fuels. And at the end of the day, the biggest threat to the Arctic remains the climate crisis itself. So that could also, you know, if we're doing a wish list, that's what I would add.
Closing, and I think we had one more question.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm also from Greenpeace. I wanted to know, again, from the legal perspective, I don't know if there's precedent to it. I know certain extractive commodities were labeled years ago in Africa as blood diamonds, and people involved in it were persecuted. Is there space to label this blood LNG? And so Total Energy's CEO may not feel so comfortable holding shares, for example, if French courts could end up imprisoning him for war crimes.
Who is happy to?
I can reply because we sued Total Energies twice with the help of French lawyers and French civil society. The first was 2023 and the second claim came in 2024. And what I have to say, the persistence pays off, because when our lawyer, incredible international lawyer, Irina Ptashnik, traveled to the High Court of France to give evidence to prove the Total war crimes, they were accepted, and those who were in support of those MPs, politicians who supported Ukraine, who supported campaign, they were not prosecuted, and the claim was called back as evidence and outcome of her witnessing in that court. But two tries again before that, one has led to the kind of plea agreement, so it was not criminal investigation and criminal claim, it was a civil claim. but Total pulled out of actually Novatek, and they actually stopped all collaboration with the gas entity at that point. But now we can see that the loan contracts are still due to immense, like sometime in 2041, which is insane. And there is something that, yeah, I agree with you completely that they need to be forced, they need to be prosecuted in courts. I'm just saying that it's quite difficult to prove the connection. When Global Witness developed their reports, they proved the evidence that the Total was involved into the supply of military jets fuel, but still Total French court and the highest criminal prosecutor on war crimes, they found international norms not being efficient enough to make them really convinced in that Total has a direct link to the war crimes. So I believe the legal basis, legal foundation for proving such difficult cases must be developed further. And this is a huge task ahead of us.
Thank you very much. And unfortunately, we have to close. And I think that there are more discussions, more questions that are coming, and more work to be done, like by these fantastic people, the panelists and the audience. Thank you very much for your interest. Thank you very much for standing with Ukraine. Thank you very much, Razom We Stand, for organizing and like giving like the framework for the discussion on the international fora. Many things to be done, many challenges to be tackled, but as Thomas has highlighted, fossil fuels, we have the elephant in the room. We eventually, as the international society, acknowledge that. Let's keep on fighting for light, for the fact that Ukrainians have to have their lights on. And this is existential. And we're here in Ukraine's pavilion talking about secularization of many topics that can't be felt by the countries that are not experienced war. But the point is that the price of the inaction is too high, because sometimes it takes the war to happen for us to understand. But please don't let war come to the doorstep, neither to Europe nor any other countries in the world. Thank you very much. The huge round of applause for everyone being here and standing here for us. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.